Welcome to the Startup Grind.
And actually, well, I'll save what else I was going to say, but I'll just say it. EA was founded the week I was born, which is like this very strange coincidence, which has nothing to do with anything. But I have incredible memories of that, and have watched, have watched what Trip has done, and excited to talk about his new company, If You Can. We have a little tradition here. Before I bring him up, we're going to practice this one time. And that's if you haven't been to a Startup Grind before, we get up out of our chairs, we get excited, we show a little appreciation for the speakers that come and speak here because they give their time, they could be with their families, they could be doing 100 other things, and they come and spend it with us. And so we're just going to practice this one time, then we're going to do it properly. But on the count of three, I want you to stand up. I want you to imagine that, that Brad Pitt just walked in here or something. Okay, for her. So on the count of three, let's try this out. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Okay. That was awesome for everybody except the guy that was drinking before. Trip Hawkins is a Bay Area native. He is an alumni of Harvard as well as Stanford. He's one of the first 50 employees at Apple, where he joined in 1978. And in 1982, he bootstrapped and then and started Electronic Arts, which was eventually funded and took it to IPO and to what you know of it today, both Electronic Arts and EA Sports, as sometimes people confuse it. He also is the founder of 3DO. He, about 10 years later, founded a company called Digital Chocolate, which we're going to talk about. And more recently, in the last couple of years, he has been working on a project called If You Can, which is helping to teach children how to resolve their problems and how to be better people and have good values. Let's give a big Startup Grind welcome for Trip Hawkins. Here we go.
I'm sorry that I'm not Brad Pitt.
What was that?
Derek, no, I'm not your father.
Well, this started off just the way I had planned in my head. Well, thank you so much for coming. I have been hoping we could get you to speak for a very long time, and you probably didn't know that, but I've been commenting on your blog. I have been, that's really the scariest thing that I did, so we'll just leave it at that, but thank you for being here.
Was that your car? I saw it down the...
If it was a burnout Pinto, it was my car. Tell us about where you grew up. Tell us about your family a little bit. We like to get to know people just a little bit. Tell us about what your mom and dad did, and tell us a little bit about your background.
First of all, I actually grew up in Southern California.
Oh, you did? Excuse me.
I came here to finish school at Stanford and stayed.
Okay.
And came to appreciate what a fantastic area it is. So my parents, both their families were originally from back east, but they had come out to California. My parents grew up in San Diego. And any of you from Southern California? Yeah, so we all came up here, right? Southern California, for me, I was not a beach kind of kid. I tried surfing but got bullied and decided this sucks. And really, I wanted to stay inside and play games. And the weather's beautiful, and my mom was always saying, "Why don't you go outside? Why don't you go outside?" And I was just having a lot of fun playing, simulation board games and deeper games like Dungeons and Dragons inside. And I was just kind of a deep thinker compared to a lot of the other kids in school. And yeah, it just didn't really fit down there.
What was the first game you ever made? Do you remember what that was? Could you tell us about it?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I really got into football and baseball. So those were the sources of my earliest heroes. And they were the first books I read, and once I started playing board games, I looked for games about football and baseball, and then in particular, fell in love with a product line called Stratimatic. Anybody ever heard of that? You got to be really geeky to know about it. Anyway, it's basically a computer game without a computer. In the way D&D is it's a computer RPG, right? Or it's a RPG without the computer. And you've got to have a whole bunch of charts and dice and probabilities affecting different outcomes and drawing cards. And it's a pain in the neck to operate a board game like that. But you get to have a real simulated experience. In fact, how many of you still play D&D occasionally? I do. And, it's, we have a lot in common.
The Stratimatic guy.
Yeah.
Let's get him up here.
So, I've got 4 kids, and they've all enjoyed having me be a dungeon master for their birthday parties and stuff. So we do that over the years, and it's been a lot of fun. I've had 2 boys and 2 girls. And
you said you're a deep thinker, and you seem to be very driven, to say the least. I mean, is that something like that you felt like was instilled in you? This kind of drive to both create and to innovate. Is that something that was instilled in you? Is that something you were born with? What is your take on that?
This is going to be maybe a longer and more intimate answer than you could imagine. But, I'll just tell you guys right now, we probably all start out being driven. But I'm not driven anymore. Now I'm driving. And the difference is that we all basically get a neurosis by the time we're about 2 years old, and you don't really know about it because your hippocampus isn't activated, so you don't have any experiential or photographic memory. But something always goes wrong in childhood, no matter how great your parents are and what good intentions they may have. So you have this piece of you that some experts call the lost self. It's a part of you that you don't get to have because it doesn't allow you to fit perfectly with your caregivers, your parents. So, for example, you might have a mom who's really stoic, and you realize, I can't be all mushy and soft because she doesn't relate to that. I've got to be a tough guy. So that becomes a false self to replace that deficit. So I became a high achiever because I didn't feel like I was good enough just being myself. I had to be driven to be an achiever. But it took me a long time to figure out that that's not who I really am. I'm really more like a creator. I'm more of an artist. How many of you have taken the Myers-Briggs personality test? And if you don't remember what your score is, I suggest you take it again, because as I've gotten older, I've really come to appreciate how valuable that tool is. First of all, in understanding yourself and breaking it down into detail about yourself, and even understanding how does that affect who you are as an executive and a manager, and how do you collaborate with people, how do you parent, who can you get along with in relationships. It's extremely valuable. And it's funny because you referred to me as a builder. So in Myers-Briggs, I'm what's called an INTJ, which is the rarest type. And I don't know about the rest of you. It's like when you take that test and then you go in and read what it says. I don't know how about you, but I had this reaction like, how do they know that? It's like, that's a secret. I haven't told anybody that. So it's uncanny how good it is. And then if you go research things like, okay, well, I'm having trouble with this friend or this kid of mine or this spouse or whatever. Okay, well, what type are they? It's really valuable, by the way, to collect data on what the other people are. And that's the other thing they say about an INTJ is it's the dominant thing is the intuition, but they call it the scientist. So I just think this is kind of weird, but this is what's totally true about it, is that I always start with the concept. I always start with pattern recognition about how I see things going in the future and developing an idea of really coming again from gut and intuition. And once that idea has formed, then I think, okay, I've got to subject this to a ton of analysis because I don't want to waste time on it if it can't hold up to a lot of scrutiny. And I'm happy to invite other people in and have them help me just beat the crap out of it.
Yeah.
To really fine tune it. And I think in entrepreneurship, that's one of the things you have to do. You can't just only trust your gut.
Right.
So as an N, I'm almost always surrounded by subordinates that are S's, which is the other way that particular variable goes. It's very complementary that way.
Well, how can, as an entrepreneur, how do you know if your gut is right or if you're just having indigestion? I mean, is it based on banging on it? Is it based on just testing it, or is that enough, or do you sometimes just have to follow that gut?
So I really think of this like being an artist. So I think if you really are an artist, say you're a painter, you can't not paint. You get a picture that forms in your head of something you want to paint or
That's
photograph or write or music you want to create. It's not an option to not do it. You feel compelled to do it. It's just that in business, it's not really art. we're being held accountable to actually make money. We end up with investors, and they expect to have an exit. So that's why you can't just, be free as a bird and do whatever the heck you want every day. You're going to be held accountable.
Let's. I wonder if we could jump ahead a little bit and we could talk. You went to Harvard. You came back. There's a fascinating story, which I don't know if you have time for it tonight, but everyone should go read this about how you created your own major, which is this really amazing story. But you came back. You go to Stanford. Can you tell us? You joined Apple in 1978, I believe. Tell us about. Do you remember the first time you met Steve Jobs? Do you remember your first interaction with Apple? Tell us what that was and what ultimately led to you deciding to go to work there.
Yeah, well, if you don't mind, I'm going to mention a couple steps.
Please do it.
So I was working for a think tank doing, IT type work for a summer. This was in 1975, so I'm, still a college kid.
Yeah.
And a coworker comes in after lunch, and I had just stayed at my desk and kind of had worked through lunch. And this guy comes back and he says, "You're not going to believe this. I was just in a retail store where you can rent a computer terminal, like an IBM 3270. That was a classic, green phosphor display, or a KSR 33. Anybody here ever heard of that? The KSR 33, that was the dude that had the roll of yellow paper and made all this racket and spit out the 10. It would literally type 10 characters per second. It was so slow you could watch every character getting formed. And he was telling me, yeah, you could take one of these things home and you only had to pay $10 an hour. And I'm thinking, oh my God, finally it's going to happen. Because up to that point, I'd already started studying computers because I wanted to make computer games. And I'm trying to figure out, well, when are we going to get computers in the home? It's like, whoa, okay, here's the first store I've ever heard of that'll let you get a computer in your home. And then this guy, his name was Paul. Paul says to me, well, that's not all. I just read this company invented a computer on a chip. So pretty soon you'll have your own computer. I'm like, whoa. That was, of course, the Intel microprocessor, right? By the way, that store, that was Paul Heiser's store. It's called The Computer Store. That was the first computer store in the world. And it just happened to be the same city where I had this job.
Wow.
And, when you have enough coincidences like that over the course of a lifetime, you really do begin to feel like you are working on God's plan just because, how could I have planned that?
Yeah.
And, going back to Steve Jobs, this is the beginning, 75, that's basically around the time that they're getting started. They hadn't really built a commercial product yet. But Dick Heiser, that was one of our first customers.
Well, and you kind of just touched on it a little bit, but you had this insight years before that, right? I wonder maybe you could talk about that that video games were going to be in people's homes, that people were going to play video games, that this was this whole movement.
Well, in fact,
you had this
I
insight
literally
that it was coming.
recognized that I wanted my friends to play these hardcore simulation games with me, and they wanted to watch TV. And I thought, we got to get the administrative stuff of this game in the box and have pictures like television. So that's I already tell you, it's got to be. It has to
you're what age at this point when you're having that thought? This is pre-college. This is
like 13 maybe.
Yeah.
So that it's going to get to that, and that's when everybody will want to do what I want to do. That I think is more beautiful than watching TV. And because I could tell I was really mentally switched on when I was playing games. That I was just way more engaged and I was learning. So anyway, and then when I had that experience in 1975, I literally, he leaves, and I started drawing on a sheet of paper, and then, okay, how long is it going to take for there to be enough of these machines in homes that I can start making the games? And I decided 1982. So that's only 7 years out. So on January 1st, 1982, I resigned from Apple. So, this is like planned pretty far in advance. So that's, so now you eventually get to Apple. I want to say one thing about Harvard is, again, if you're really an entrepreneur, you have such passion and such belief in what you're doing that other people are not going to shut you down. And I had this very powerful dude at Harvard who ran one of the big academic departments, and his statement to me was, "You are wasting your time monkeying around with games." And he tried to do things that interfered with what I was trying to do.
You want to drop his name on the video, or we'll find him. We'll interview him at Startup Grind Boston. Call him out on it.
Let's see. I think it's Marty Speckler.
Thank you.
And here's the Here's a funny story about this, is that I'm trying to apply for this special major that I called Strategy and Applied Game Theory, which is just a academic way of saying I'm going to make video games. And one of the things they made you do if you wanted to have a special field like that is you had to go find, well, which department would you be in if you got turned down? Okay, go to that, figure out what your course load would be in that department, and then go get them to write a letter saying they don't want you. So I go talk to Marty Speckler. It's really clear he doesn't want me. He's telling me what a waste I am.
Right.
And I walk out of there on kind of a cushion of air thinking, yes, you know. Well, then he writes this letter saying, we would be delighted to have Mr. Hawkins in our department. My thing gets torpedoed. But the next year, the President of the United States asked Marty to come be the head of the United States Council of Economic Advisors. So he goes to Washington, D.C. to work for the president. And somebody new came in, and I got my gig.
So we might be finding him at Start Grind DC then, is what you're saying.
Afraid so.
Okay. So, and did you graduate in that? I mean, did you see that through, or
yeah.
you did?
And as you can probably imagine, my motivation went through the roof when I really got a chance to focus on what I cared about.
So then you move back here. You enroll at Stanford, right? You come back.
And,
you come back to the
here's
West
the funny
Coast.
thing there is that I'm going to Stanford, but you can't find any place to live around Stanford. So I ended up renting a house in Mountain View with a couple of buddies, and right down the street is the Byte Shop.
No kidding.
So that was the first chain of computer stores, and that was their first store. And I decided to go in there one day, and you remember those beautiful wallpaper maps of the surface of the moon with the Earth in the background? They had one of those. They had a bunch of card tables set up with just junk spewing across them. You know, components and motherboards and stuff. And I'm just sort of looking around, and finally a guy comes up to me and says, what do you want? And I can tell that I've pretty much broken into some kind of a secret club. And he can tell, yeah, you don't belong here. What are you doing here? And I said, oh, well, I'm kind of intrigued with what you're doing. So tell me, how do I go about getting a computer here? And he says, well, first you start with your motherboard. And I said, what's a motherboard? And he just had the most contemptuous look, like, get out. If you don't know what a motherboard is, you really don't belong here. I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to have a real impact on this industry. Because, but by then I just said, somebody has to explain this stuff to people, ordinary people.
Yeah.
And I think I can do that. I already kind of understood that I was someone who could speak both dialects. I could talk to the engineers, and I could go talk to the public.
So and through that, you eventually kind of did this research project, is that right, on kind of evaluating who was selling which products, what the market was looking like, is that right?
Yeah,
Tell
so
us
for
about
what it's
that.
worth, you guys are beyond this, but if you're a kid in school and you don't have a job yet, my number one piece of advice is go work for free in the place where you're actually going to learn something. And I went and got myself, I just cold called the very first company that made a programmable cartridge video game console, and none of you know the name of this company. I bet you think you do, but you're wrong. Who was the first company to have a cartridge video game
We
system?
already told them they'd be wrong, so now no one wants to be embarrassed.
Well, that's way off. Commodore basically never had one. They made computers. So it wasn't Atari. It was Fairchild. Hard to believe. Again, series of coincidences from that little house in Mountain View. I would drive to Stanford, and I drove right by the entrance to Fairchild.
Just lucky.
I caught on pretty quickly that, wow, I'm in this place called Silicon Valley. I had no idea. I come out of Stanford. I didn't know what Silicon Valley was until I got there. And you're just rich in opportunities even then. So I just went into Fairchild one day and said, hey, I want to talk to somebody in marketing. And they said, what about? I'm a Stanford student, and I want to do a free project on market research so you can understand your customers better. Oh, okay. So some junior marketing guy comes out. I pitched him on how I want to do this project, and he says, okay. And I asked him for a bunch of warranty cards and customer addresses so I could do a questionnaire mailing. And I went back and got independent course credit for it at Stanford. And then I parlayed that into a summer job in a market research firm. And they wanted somebody to write a study on computer printers. And I said, well, I'd like to write a study on personal computers. And they said, what's a personal computer? And I explained it, and they said, we don't have any clients that are interested in that. okay, well, if I do a good job in this printer study, will you reconsider that? Will you let me write a study about it? They said, sure, okay. So, of course, first the printer study and then the personal computer study ended up being the best-selling studies they'd ever had. And this stuff was just starting to take off and get noticed. And so he asked how I met Steve Jobs. Well, I put a marketing flyer together about my personal computing study, and I sent it out to all the companies. And then I'm at home one day, and the phone rings, and I pick it up, and it's Steve Jobs. So those are the days where people are actually listed in phone books. And he knew I'd come in and talk to a few other people there. And basically this, for me, was my entree to getting a job, because I'm not an engineer. And at Stanford, they say that, yeah, you don't ever want to go into a Silicon Valley company without being an engineer, and you sure don't want to be the first MBA. And I was going to break both of those rules.
Wow.
So
at Apple, they had no, at the time, they had no MBAs,
No.
they had no non-engineers.
Literally, at Apple, there were about 25 office workers.
Wow.
And they were all engineers pretty much, even if they were working in marketing.
Hmm.
And then we had about 25 guys in the back assembling the first
Wow.
handful of Apple IIs. So basically my entree with these guys was I'd call them up and I'd say, hey, I'm doing this study. I want to come talk to you about your business. Well, why should I talk to you? Well, because I'm going to publish this study and I'm going to have a profile of your company, and it might help you raise money. It might help you get publicity. It might help you in all these different ways.
Or the opposite.
Well, anyway, a lot of them became more willing to talk.
Yeah.
And then once they'd all talk to me, I had all their contact information, so I could send out the marketing flyer. And when they showed interest in it, I could call them up and say, hey, it's like a $1,000 study. A lot of them don't want to buy it.
Yeah.
But I can come by and show it to them.
Yeah.
And I can tell them about it. So Steve Jobs calls, and he says, I'm really mad at you. You did this study, and it says that Radio Shack is selling more computers than we are, which was true. It was true by a wide margin. And I explained to him, well, it is true. But he was a little uncomfortable because Apple was running an ad that said, Apple is the best-selling personal computer. And I was going to create a problem with my study. Anyway, and I said to Steve, yeah, look, I'd be happy to come in and talk to you about the study. And because I'm also looking for a job in the industry. So there you go.
What with the perception that the world has of him today, or that you see in a movie or you read from this book, what you saw in the early days, what were you either impressed by or not impressed by the young early Steve Jobs that other people didn't get to see, working with him so closely?
Well, he was very uncivilized. So when I first got there, after about a week, I remember saying to Mike Markkula, who's the chairman of the board, the adult supervision, the money guy, and the head of marketing. So he was my boss. And I remember just pointing down the hall at Steve, and I said to Mike, Mike, we need to do something about that. And he nodded with understanding. He pulled me into his office, and he said, look, you should have seen this guy a year ago. He's saying he didn't know how to put the fork and the spoon down by a plate. He didn't know how to comb his hair or wash it. I mean, we're talking almost like the wild man from Borneo. And over the years, he gradually picked up a few clues about hygiene and etiquette, et cetera. but also just right from the beginning, I mean, he's just an incredible force of nature. I don't really have any doubt that 500 years, he's the one guy from our generation that history will
People are still talking about.
That, because of the impact that he had. He had an obvious gift of really understanding better than anybody else how to shape technology for human use.
Yeah. I read somewhere that he asked you one time, have you ever taken LSD? Is that right?
Yeah, this is kind of a running joke with him because he was a big fan of LSD.
Right.
He was pretty convinced that it had really, opened him up. And I was often a thorn in his side. But he always had a high degree of respect for anybody that he thought was equal to him. And he really wanted to be surrounded by people that were really talented. But sometimes he wanted to win an argument, and people like that are not always going to just be pushed around. So we had I think a healthy amount of mutual respect, and we were similar.
You're about the
in
same age, right?
Yeah, very similar in age. So we had a lot of kind of camaraderie. Like there was one time where he pulled me into his office, and he wanted to ask me about the older woman that I was then dating, and it was because he had started dating Joan Baez, and he wanted some pointers.
How much older? Like quite old? I mean, you kind of like cougar older, or was she just a little bit? This is not something I read about, so this is interesting.
Well, it's all kind of relative. I mean, I was in my early 20s, and I think she was closer to 30. So yeah,
Okay.
That seemed pretty old.
Good for you.
I don't remember how old. Joan Baez is still alive. You can look it up.
Sure.
How old she was. But yeah, there was a lot of personal stuff that would go on with Steve. At any rate, I was always in the room when any important discussion or decision was being made, and I was often voicing a point of view that wasn't identical to Steve's. I mean, for example, he was really convinced the Mac could launch with 64 kilobytes of memory. A lot of the stories say that he thought it could be 128. No, he thought it could be 64. And after a while, even he and his team realized, yeah, that's not going to fly, and so it went up to 128. But I kept bugging him, saying it's never going to work at 128. You need at least 256, probably 512. That was the kind of stuff that we would argue about.
Yeah.
And he would try to justify more resource and attention to what projects he was advocating by essentially misleading people about what price points he could hit and stuff like that. So I was a bit of a thorn in his side. So this time where he came into my office and he just looked at me and said, "Hey, Trip, have you ever taken LSD?" I go, "No." "I thought so." And then he walks away. And I know what that meant was, I was just in this meeting and they won't give me what we want because of something you said. Good day. And if you had just taken LSD, I wouldn't have this problem.
Tell us about, this is another thing that I think is not very well known. I really want to get to electronic arts and some of these other things, but I must ask you this about when Steve was allowed to see what Xerox was doing at Park. Tell us about that story and how you were right in that story. We all know that story. So tell us how that happened and what role you played there.
So you guys have all heard of the Xerox Alto, the machine. And one of the software services that ran on it was Smalltalk. So he had been, I guess, invited by Adele Goldberg to go up and see that. And it was more about the Smalltalk demo, but you can't see the demo without using the Alto, and the Alto's got the mouse, the bitmap graphics, et cetera. So he thought that was all pretty cool. He comes back and he tells me, and he grabs me and John Couch and Tom Whitney, and the four of us get back in the car and go back up there, and all got a chance to look at it. And
the first time. This is the first time that anyone had seen it. I mean, from Apple anyway.
Yeah, it was the first kind of official Apple visit.
Right.
Yeah. And Steve and I had actually already been talking about the mouse. And in fact, I had hired a guy that had been with Xerox. And that guy, incredibly bright guy, Glenn Edens, he smuggled the first mouse at my request, smuggled it in from a colleague of his at Xerox. Because you couldn't just get your hands on one easily. In fact, the Xerox mouse at that time, the bill of materials, the component parts, cost about $500.
Wow.
So it's a big deal. We essentially stole that from Xerox. And, of course, we realized right away, we can't make a mouse that's this expensive.
I mean, statute of limitations is over, right? So you're fine at this point, right?
Well, they actually didn't invent the mouse, but they had one. But to give an idea of the kind of work that I was doing, we were figuring out, we really think this mouse makes sense. We ended up hiring a Stanford friend of mine and his design company to design a mouse for us that would be a lot cheaper. And it was the first optical mouse that had a parts cost of $15. And of course, that's what enabled it to be commercially viable. And basically, around this time where we're thinking about, what you see is what you get, and bitmap graphics. Of course, Apple II already had bitmap graphics, so I think there was already an understanding why that was a good thing, and how can we do more with it. And Markla, when I first started there, he said to me, "Hey, I think this is hilarious because I didn't really know that much about business. I was a kid." And Markla says to me, "Hey, Trip, you have an MBA, therefore you must know something about business." Pretty laughable. "Go figure out how we can sell these to businesses." So that was basically my first assignment. And the big pivot there was all of the thinking at that time was, big companies have computers, and as these computers are getting cheaper, smaller companies can have them. And now with these even cheaper ones, small businesses can have them. And I looked at that and realized, no, that's not going to work because it's just it's not the right audience because they're not technically sophisticated enough to deal with it, and they're not even that sophisticated about the kind of things they would do with it, like accounting. And so we've basically, I sort of drove the process of figuring out that we should go after the Office desktop. And then we started looking at the word processor market, and there were already a couple of WYSIWYG products. Like Xerox had one called the Xerox 860, and they had a white display that looked like a sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, but it didn't have a mouse. So one of the things I did is I went to the annual Office trade show to try to figure out what was going on competitively, and Xerox had these on display in their booth, and over in the corner, with no power being assigned to it, was a Xerox Alto. And I thought, okay, that's kind of funny. They're not even showing it to people. And I went up to the reception desk and I said, who's the highest ranking guy here? Oh, that guy over there. He's a senior vice president. Again, I'm just a kid. So I go over and I say, so I notice you have an Alto over here in the corner, but you're not demonstrating it. How come? And he makes some excuse. He said, so I'm just curious. The Alto uses a mouse, but none of your commercial products like the 860 use a mouse. Why is that? Because I don't like it. Really? Why don't you like it? Because it can roll off the table. You can't make this shit up. This is true. And I was able to fly back home, say, we don't have to worry about Xerox.
They can't even get it to stop rolling off the table.
Well, you could just tell they had no idea. They just had no idea.
So you're at Apple till January 1, 1982. You've grown from 50 employees to 4,000. Tell us about amazing software. What led for you to, I mean, everything by all accounts is going great at Apple. And it's a great time to stay at Apple. You were there at the beginning, or very early anyways. What led you to make that jump? And tell us what happened and how you bootstrapped this company to begin it.
Yeah, so obviously I always wanted to make games.
Yeah.
And frankly, the game market was just not really a big deal to Apple. And it was hard to leave. It was a great company. Company had been really generous with me, and I certainly had a really good time and had a tremendous opportunity to grow. I'll tell you, for those of you that are young entrepreneurs, there's hardly any substitute for observation. So it doesn't matter what you're doing in another company. Because I had already started my first company. I was a teenager, and I made a board game, a football board game. And I didn't have enough capital, and there were all kinds of other reasons, but I had to shut it down. And I realized, okay, I don't know enough about business, but this is really exciting, and I want to do it again. So before I do it again, I'm going to go work somewhere else for a while so I can understand what I need to know. And that was the greatest thing for me about Apple, was the fact that it grew so quickly, and we dealt with so many issues. And I had this front row seat, and I'm just a really good observer. So it wasn't that, in the end, it really wasn't that hard to leave, because I'd always planned to.
You planned on that day to leave, or in 1982, this was when these things were going to happen.
Yeah, and of course, the way it worked out is that they were really upset that I was leaving, and they tried to convince me to stick around. I stuck around for a few more months, but I could just tell, now I got to go.
Yeah.
And it was around I guess February, I think, is when I met with Don Valentine and got encouragement from him.
From Sequoia, for those that.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the ways I could tell he was interested is he said, yeah, if you need office space, we'll provide it.
They let you work there without funding you, right? They just offered you space.
Right. And they're trying to keep an eye on, they want to have more
Right.
of a captive opportunity with something they think is interesting. And so basically I left Apple. I kind of started running it just by myself out of my home office, and I had a lot of research and people I wanted to talk to. And then by the time I was ready to actually hire employees, and it had already been incorporated for a while at that point, then we went into space at Sequoia.
And you just bootstrapped it with what, the money you had made at Apple, or your options that you had had? Okay. And tell us one of the very innovative things that you had way before your time on this is this idea that engineers were artists, and that and coupled with that games were an art form. And like you go up and down the freeway now and you see these billboards. I wonder what you think about them, but it's like, we're hiring ninjas, engineering ninjas, rock stars, and all this crazy stuff. And it's like, here you are in 1982, more than 30 years ahead of that game. I just wonder, like, where did that come from? Like, where did that vision come from? How did you see it so clearly? Because it was totally embedded in the early EA culture. I mean, you you treated these guys, you brought them out of their mom's basement, and you treated them like they should have been, like they were the people doing all the work. They were the builders. They were the creators. Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I think some of this was just learning about myself as a creative person and learning what creativity is all about, and having kind of a natural feel and a natural interest in media. Because, clearly I had kind of evidence interest in media kind of generally even when I was a kid. And then I had the great opportunity at Apple to work with these genius caliber software developers, and they had diva personalities, and they were really emotionally needy. And that's where I realized, yeah, these guys are basically artists. So it just became very clear from working with some of that talent at Apple.
Another thing that you all had that in my time at EA, this was something that we always look back at, was this idea of, can a computer make you cry? And this is just like, in the video, we'll put the picture of this up there, but you should Google this when you get home. It's like this, on one side it's this manifesto, and on the other side, it's this picture of these like 12 engineers like dressed in black, like they look like rock stars, but it was
There's only 6 of them, but yeah.
6, excuse me. But this idea, though, that, a computer, that at some point that this art form would become so advanced that maybe a game could make you cry. I mean, this is in the days of computers were not making you cry unless they were crashing, right? So, again, where did that come? Where did you see that this was going to be this new interactive medium that didn't previously exist, but this was going to be on par with some of these other things?
Yeah, so I could tell it was a new medium, and that, like all other media, there was going to be a creative production process. And I started studying all the other media industries to figure out, okay, well, how do they all do it, and what can I draw from? So case in point, the first software development agreement was a hybrid of an Apple development agreement and a Hollywood music contract. And I got a hold of these 2 source documents and kind of merged them together with the help of a lawyer. So there was a really deliberate process there of just saying, well, okay, how do we borrow principles from these other industries and figure out how to apply them to an engineering-driven medium that's a new deal. So part of my perspective about it as a medium is that, like any other medium, it was an art form, and it was going to affect people emotionally. So the manifesto was really our ad agencies, which was really just 3 guys that kind of got together as freelancers, and then we became their first client. It was their kind of redrafting of what they'd heard me talking about. And they had the idea to get that point across about emotion and passion and art with the idea of the phrase, can a computer make you cry?
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, as you eventually leave EA, you were there till about 1993, and I wonder, talk to us about the ups and downs of an entrepreneur. You went through this stage of, you bootstrapped it, you quit your job, you bootstrapped, you hire all these people, you raise funding, you build this massive company, you go up and down all these different business models, these different opportunities, deals, partnerships. Is that an experience that you would do over again? Is that an experience that how did it change you? Tell us just a little bit about building a company from nothing to what EA is and has become. What is that experience like? What tell us about that.
Yeah, I think if we're going to be true to ourselves, you have to understand your identity, and you have to accept the gestalt of it, and realize that there's going to be the good with the bad, and there are going to be things you're better at, and in some ways, the ways in which you're better at them are going to create liabilities and weaknesses somewhere else. And if you have a lot of success early, like I did, inevitably, that's going to create some problems. It's going to go to your head. I mean, and Steve Jobs went through the same thing. He really struggled in the 1980s, for example. So basically, I think this is just the way real life asserts itself. Again, honestly, I think we all a lot of us go through this experience where you're chasing ideals, you're driven, and there are flaws with both of those things. Because the ideal is not satisfying in and of itself. It's the idea of it that you fall in love with, not the reality of it. and that I think entrepreneurship involves a lot of ideals. Love involves a lot of ideals, and sometimes we're caught up in the ideal instead of dealing with the real. And maybe that's just because I'm a strong N. I'm just a very intuitive person. Maybe that's more specific to my personality type. And that it causes you to end up having blind spots, in your judgment and not being in touch with what's real. So 3DO, it was a bold idea, and just wasn't realistic. And I wasn't, I'd been on such a roll for a number of years that I wasn't really that open-minded about what anybody else had to say about it, because I didn't really particularly care for the alternative. The alternative was accepting the idea that companies like Nintendo were going to take over and we were going to be servants in their kingdoms. Yeah. And guess what? That's where we are now. That's where we are. It isn't Nintendo, but Nintendo basically invented the business model that everybody operates now from the platform side. There's no self-respecting platform that's going to take less than the 30% number that Steve came up with. I still have no idea how he decided on that number, but we're sure stuck with it now.
And for those that don't know, you leave EA in 1993. It
was 94, actually.
94, excuse me. You're pretty good with dates. So you leave in 94. You're kind of chairman of both these companies. You're starting 3DO, and then you eventually leave EA and focus solely on 3DO. And I wonder if we could just talk a little bit about EA for a second, and then we can keep moving. I really want to talk about what you're working on today. But when I was at EA, I left EA. I quit EA about 4.5 years ago, to be precise, and it was about 10 years, 11 years after you had left. And EA was my first job. EA was my Apple. It was the same experience. I went there to learn, to make mistakes, so I could then go start my company. And nobody worked harder at EA than I did. No one loved EA more than I did. But what I started to learn as I got there, what my perception was that that EA without a founder at the helm or someone like a visionary at the helm, it was almost like it was missing its soul. This is my perception. And as I have looked back on that experience, which I loved, in my life has been greatly affected by your work, which you didn't ever know about until tonight. But EA has played a huge role in my career, whatever failures I end up having. But I've always wondered if them bringing you back, or not to run the company, but even as an advisor to say, hey, look, these were our roots. This is what it was all about. Is that something that you've ever been asked to do? Is that something that you would do if asked to do? Because if it always felt like to me that it was missing what that energy and that that vision that you had in 1982. It got lost by the time 2005 rolled around. And if it had that, the team was smart, the team was great, but it didn't have that kind of leadership. So I wonder if you could tell us, have you ever been asked to do that? Would you do that if somebody asked you to do it? Is there any interest? You're like, hey, I got bigger problems than that. I don't want to deal with that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I have a full-time job.
That's true.
But yeah, I'd be happy to advise them. I have not been asked, and I think basically, they moved on, I moved on.
Sure.
And I think there must be something somehow that feels kind of threatening to them about having me come back in some fashion, even for a visit. Although I have in fact visited there, but I think this is just one of the things that you have to have is some kind of yin-yang balance in leadership between what you would call the suits and the ponytails. And I was always a ponytail.
We're the ponytail guys.
Yeah, you got to work on yours.
I have a hat with a ponytail on it.
So I was always kind of a ponytail that could understand all the operational stuff. But and there was good balance when I was there. And once I came out of that equation, you could just tell that the balance kind of shifted to more of the operating mindset. And they were good at running the factory and cranking out the stuff that was already understood in the business model that had already been established.
Yeah.
And look, the industry's gone through a whole lot of changes and pivots. I can't tell you that if I'd stayed there, I wouldn't have screwed it up myself. I'm not going to make any assumptions that I would have done any better than anybody else, because it's been a really tricky, complicated industry. I mean, just even the last 5 years especially, I think
everything's changed all over again.
More dynamic with more pivots being required. It's just crazy.
Another thing that's very unique about you, I've probably, in the last 4 years, I've interviewed 50 people that have done some amazing things in the Valley. But one thing that's very unique to you is this, you build EA, and then you don't go become a VC or like go retire. You could have retired easily. You go start building again. You build another company, and then you did that, and then 10 years later, 9 years later, to be precise, I think, you then go build Digital Chocolate. You're a founder again, and here we are 10 years later, and you're doing it again. And I think, like, where does that creative itch come from? How do you even have the energy to do that every 10 years? Like, I don't even know anyone. I can't even pinpoint you with another person almost that has done that. Where does the energy come to do that? Why do you keep doing that?
Yeah, I don't think retirement has ever really been attractive to me. And
have you been to Hawaii, like North Shore? Turtle Bay, bungalows.
I've hiked the Nepali Coast Trail both ways, all 22 miles,
Just one up me, but it's cool.
I continue to have so much fun, and I just sort of blend it. I'm much better at blending the fun in around the work now. So just in the last 2.5 years, I've been to like 25 different countries.
Wow.
And I've been to a total of 60 different countries now.
This is with were you going to raves, or what were you doing?
Some of it is very, very personal, places that, I just really badly want to go there. Like, this is going to come as a complete shock, but I'm really into castles.
Yeah. Carcassonne, have you been there?
Yes. I went there 3 years ago. And then last year I was in the Dordogne.
Wow.
I really got off on Crichton's book Timeline, where he said a story there, and I thought, wow, I got to go there.
That's cool.
And then sometimes I'll go places for business reasons, and I'll branch off. So like last year I was in India on business, and I went up and trekked up in Nepal to go see Mount Everest, and I have made so many dents in my bucket list already. It's pretty awesome. So I just kind of blend that stuff in, but frankly, I'm built to work, and I'm built to create. And I think the two dominant characteristics that I benefited from learning from my parents were being tough and being hardworking, and therefore, work, it just comes naturally. I'm just going to naturally look for work that needs to be done. And for me, the entrepreneurship has always been about waiting until some picture forms, and then feeling like, wow, that is just so compelling. I have to go do that. And that's one thing I'll just tell you, as an older entrepreneur, is that the passion and the energy have never changed, which is kind of exciting to discover that. I would have figured that, maybe you lose that, maybe you slow down. No, that hasn't happened at all.
How does one develop creativity? Steve Jobs called you a very creative person. Your work is an example of that as well. But is it innate? Is it learned? How do you develop it? Is it a muscle that you can work on? Tell us about it.
You can do both. So I think obviously ability and willingness to think outside the box and to be genuinely inventive, where just you're imaginative and new ideas occur to you. That's probably a little bit of an ingrown, a genetic or ingrown characteristic from how you were incubated. Beyond that, you can develop the skill to be more willing to bring your ideas forward. I think a lot of people probably have ideas. For example, I bet there were Chinese farmers 600 years ago that thought it would be a great idea to have a maritime economy, a huge navy, and go see what was on the other side of the oceans. But I bet a lot of them figured that if they brought it up, they'd get in trouble. Because it was a very patriarchal society. And if that society had been more like Europe, then we'd all be speaking Chinese right now. So if you look at why Europe accomplished what it did, a lot of it had to do with the fact that there developed a philosophy in Europe around freedom, and it included the Christian reform and the Industrial Revolution and the Renaissance, and all these things are basically saying, we're better off when there's freedom to think and freedom to create. And we're very lucky to be here in Silicon Valley, where it's the best place in the world for that. In terms of being supportive, you can sound pretty crazy here and be completely
blend
normal.
right in. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe you start with some intrinsic capacity for it, but then you can nurture your willpower to get out there on the bleeding edge. And then there's all kinds of skills you can develop. And they've learned so much now about the plasticity of the brain and the ability to rewire yourself. I'll give you my favorite personal example. I got lots of personal examples because I'll tell you I've made a tremendous investment in the last 5 years just trying to become a different person because I wasn't happy 5 years ago. And that's a whole long story all in and of itself. But I'll just give you one example. It has to do with nutrition. No, this is not a comment against vegetarians at all, but I happen to have the taste buds that can recognize instantly how delicious a bite of a really nice steak would be. And yet I've rewired my brain to prefer salmon and broccoli because I know that it's better for me. And if you go through the stages of that, it's like, okay, well, objectively, the salmon is really salty and broccoli has a really strange flavor. It's kind of alien. And kids would be happy to explain this to you, like, yeah, steak is good. The other ones are not good. I'm just going to have this. I'm just going to have a hamburger. I'm just going to have the steak. But as I've gone through this mental process, like step number one is, okay, well, this is how it seems right now. And then step two is, well, there's a really good reason why you should prefer the salmon or the broccoli. It'll make you healthier. Okay, and then you start doing it, and it starts to become a habit. And even though the non-cognitive part of your brain is still giving you the same information, yeah, the steak smells better, the cognitive side of your brain is saying, no, this is better. And you believe it. And then after a while, even on the emotional side, the non-cognitive side, you're thinking, oh, yummy broccoli. Oh, this is great. I get to have salmon. And seriously, this truly happened with me. And it happened in a bunch of other ways. So there's a lot you can do to rewire yourself.
It sounds like a reality distortion field or something.
It's the broccoli distortion field.
Wish you could coach my kids. You sound like you'd be a good coach. How do you, since I left EA, I've made a dozen different products, and games are by far the hardest thing that I have found to build because engineering fun is you can't put it in front of a focus group and just automatically make it better or tweak this, it's going to be fun. How do you create fun, and how do you evaluate fun as you're building games?
It always starts with who's the target audience and what is it they're interested in. And just one of the things I've always believed, this is a phrase that I heard back when I was at Apple. We worked with a creativity consultant that had worked for Walt Disney that always used to say that creativity is the rearranging of the old in a new way. So, I may occasionally have a genuinely original idea, but mostly what I've done in my career is draw from somewhere else to create something new that is kind of a derivative. So, the Army Men brand, that was my idea. But I didn't invent Army Men. I just thought it'd be clever to bring those Army Men to life in a video game.
Yeah.
And same thing with EA Sports. I didn't invent football. I just thought, yeah, there's an audience that would buy it if you can make an authentic simulation. So a lot of it really depends on the audience. So if you look at what I'm doing now, again, there's borrowed interest, same idea. It's the name of it is If, because there's this famous poem about character by Rudyard Kipling named If. So I just know that it'll help our customers understand what we're doing if they go back and read the poem. And here's another funny thing about marketing and branding is that all the verbs and nouns are taken, but weird words like if are much more available. And this is kind of mind-boggling because we're really
That's a great insight.
We're just emerging from stealth mode now. We've really not done any marketing. We haven't spent $1 in advertising. And just picture this. How hard would it be for you on no marketing budget to get a trademark on a 2-letter word and have that outrank billions of search results on Google? Well, that's what we do right now. So, again, just because it's such a weird word, I could tell that there was not much in front of us that was going to stay in front of us once the word got around. And so if you just type in if game or if you can, there'll be billions of results, and we'll be first.
Wow.
And if you put in if, just IF, we're at the top of the second page now, again, out of billions and billions of results. So that's just a starting point to think about branding. And then, the game basically teaches kids social and emotional learning.
Tell us about what the company is, what your mission is, what type of, you've got one game that's been released. What games are you creating, or what game have you created?
So basically, it's a service that looks and feels like an immersive role-playing game or adventure game that has the kind of look and feel of an interactive Pixar movie, and it targets kids 6 to 12. So the foundation of it is fun gameplay, so the kids just think they're playing a fun game. And it's a pretty good-looking fun game, because in that age range, they're not really that accustomed to high-performance 3D graphics and immersion. And then, of course, we really market it to parents and teachers that will understand that, hey, there's a learning benefit from social and emotional learning, which is turning out to be a really critical missing link in education and in people's lives today. So that's where I felt there was, again, a really great opportunity for innovation and a chance to really bring a revolution to what's going on with education and learning, because it's about time that we really started using technology effectively there.
Well, you've said you're trying to help raise kids with different values to solve the world's big problems. Wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, like what types of values do kids need to solve the world's big problems? What types of things are you trying to install?
I want to make clear that if you look at the history of character and values and morals, generally in the past, it was something that was taught by the religion and by the parents of that religion. And pretty much everybody grew up in a little tribe or a village, and little children, they grew up alongside their parents, and their parents were role modeling, and they're going to religious services all the time, and that's where you would hear about it. So this information generally would be in a religious or an ethnic context. Okay, about 100 years ago, that started to break down, and if you look at how much it's declined now, pretty much everybody's living in a big city, and all the kids go to a public school, and all the religious groups and all the ethnic groups are crammed in together, and these are kids that are not growing up alongside their parents because their parents are at work or they're missing, and they're not going to religious services, and the schools historically didn't teach this content. So SEL, this is a brilliant thing about 20 years ago, was a group of the leading thinkers about this in the academic world got together and said, hey, let's frame this in a way that's not religious, that's completely secular, and it's about managing emotions, regulating your expression, building positive relationships, making effective and healthy social decisions. It's basically a skill set that everybody wants their kid to know. And yet, even today, even though it's actually been proven in scientific studies that it improves academic performance if kids learn this stuff. It doesn't just reduce bullying and reduce discipline problems in schools and improve student well-being. It improves academic performance. It's kind of logical that it would, but it's not at any kind of scale. And it's so not at scale, there's not even a textbook for it, much less a standardized textbook for it. So what's exciting in today's world is that we can come in and we can put it in a game, and we're working with these master teachers that have developed this curriculum around it and polished it over the last 40 years. We can put it in a game, and that game can reach scale, because it can be an app in the App Store. And we just launched it a week ago, and we've got 200,000 installs already, again, without $1 of advertising.
As I was reviewing this, and I have 2 little kids and one coming next month.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It sounds like you almost start to make parents obsolete at some point. Like, is the problem you're trying to solve hey, if kids do these things, this is what parents are supposed to do, right? Is they're supposed to teach you all these things.
Parenting today is the toughest job in the world.
Agreed.
And it's maybe the worst of all in America because you have a lot of single parents. That makes it even harder. And they're expected to have a full-time job and run the household and be the mom or the dad, right? That's 3 different jobs. So everybody's under a lot of pressure, and the schools are struggling. And so as a parent, you're worried about just sending your kid off into that school climate and what's going on with bullying and depression and youth suicide and shootings, and it's crazy. And then the dropout rates are epic. You talk about the high school dropout rate. Public high school dropout rate in the U.S. is about 1/3. And that's 1/3 of the ones that start high school. By the time you get to the start of high school, maybe 10 or 20% have already dropped out from elementary school. So we're only getting about half of the public school kids in America through high school. So if you're a parent, it's like, yeah, is that going to, is just sending my kid off to that place where there might be another kid with a gun? Is that a great thing? So everybody's worried about that. And then on the other side of it, what is it that kids are doing today? They're playing games on devices. And as a parent, again, right there, you're concerned, well, that's, if they're spending all day long launching Angry Birds, they're worried about what happens when the kid goes off to school, and they're worried what happens when he's at home. And I think there's an opportunity for a whole category of content to emerge that offers some learning benefit that still feels to the child like it's a really fun game and gives mom an opportunity to curate the content on the tablet so that it's more beneficial for their child.
Have you guys looked at being like the platform of creating social good within existing games? Like maybe the Angry Birds should be actually building buildings instead of knocking them down. Like they should become creators. You could.
There's a bunch of green pigs that are trying to get a measure on the ballot related to that, I think.
I have a couple of questions for you. We're going to end here in just a minute. We'll take one or two questions, and then Trip has an engagement he needs to get to, and I promise to get him out of here on time. With all these people that you've worked with being in the Valley for, I'm going to get that. Just tell me what the number of years is, because I'm going to get it wrong, and then you're going to correct me. How many years have you been in the Valley? I won't even guess.
Gosh, I'd have to start thinking about it. I guess.
Then I could have made that one up.
It's over 35 years.
Over 35 years. Who do you admire in terms of the entrepreneurs, the creators? Who are the people that you admire?
I'll tell you lots of people. I'll tell you, I have hundreds of heroes, hundreds of personal heroes, and some of them are fictional. Some of them are historic.
Who are your fictional heroes?
Oh, man. I sometimes have to kind of think to get in this part of my brain, but. James Bond, that would certainly be one.
Any particular one?
Certainly,
like Pierce Brosnan, James
people
Bond?
Like Shakespeare. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Lawrence of Arabia, and both the man, but also David Lean, the guy that made the movie. Even Sam Spiegel, the guy that produced the movie. Sam Spiegel, you guys probably don't know who that is, but he won the Best Picture Oscar 3 times in a 6-year period.
Wow.
He's the only guy that's ever done that. And Lawrence of Arabia was one of those films. And in terms of people I've worked with, again, lots of heroes. Maybe the first one that pops into my head here is Jim Nichols. He was the guy that he's a very troubled young man, and I kind of rescued him to help him get a career started in the game business. He was one of the first developers that worked with EA. And later on, he was the guy who really figured out how the Sega Genesis worked. We had this crazy project to reverse engineer it. What a lot of people wouldn't know about a project like that is if you're the engineer that goes into the clean room to do that work, you're basically saying you never get to develop a game for that machine.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have to violate copyright to figure out how it works. Because you're going to have to see decompiled code on the screen. That's a copyright infringement. It's considered fair use because you're just figuring out how it works. And then
you can't ever do anything with it.
And then you're going to write down how it works. And so if you want to make a game, you just read what I wrote. You're not infringing their copyright. I'm allowing you to do that.
Yeah.
But since I infringed their copyright, I can't make the game. So you had to have these heroes be willing to go on that mission. And he not only signed up to go on that mission, but there were other good engineers that couldn't figure it out. And he made all these breakthroughs in figuring it out.
Wow.
And that was the pivot point for the really dramatic change in the fortunes of EA.
Who's the smartest person you've ever worked with?
I suppose it's really easy to say Steve, because certainly in some ways he absolutely was. I pretty regularly meet really smart people, and pretty regularly meet people that I feel like are way smarter than I am, and that's always a lot of fun. And I mentioned Glenn Edens earlier. That's another guy that just was unbelievably smart. I mean, I'm pretty sure that we wouldn't have galvanized on our view about how we develop the office market at Apple without Glenn.
Yeah. If you could co-found a company with anyone other than the people that you just have started your company with, you've started IF with, who would those people be? Who is the dream team?
Are you talking about only people that I've worked with, or
no,
or
just
anybody?
people. Yeah, people you've met. Who would be the dream team other than those that you're already teamed up with, who would be the people to work with if you could pick from anybody?
The first name that just popped in my head is Mark Andreessen. Just because
Investor of yours.
Well, yeah, and he just seems like a super smart guy. And he's super smart guy.
Yeah.
And he's got the right kind of quality of
Bald
swagger.
guy, too.
Yeah, there you go.
No reaction whatsoever.
Yeah, it probably takes a little time for me to figure that out, but Walt Disney is one of my big heroes. It's like, yeah, if Jesus is another big hero. It's like if I could go back.
That would be a team.
If I could go back in time, yeah.
Mark Andreessen.
Okay, we're going to teach you social and emotional learning. Here's our teacher. It's Jesus.
We got going to get in trouble with my congregation here if I say something stupid. But yeah, you'd have Andreessen doing the technology, you have Disney doing the creative, and Jesus doing the culture, values.
And the question is, who's the finance guy? I got to think about the finance guy.
Let's give Trip a big, huge round of applause. Thank you for coming.